So think about the things you do. Think about your hobbies and your sports and your relationships. Think about the ways you suffer and think about the ways you are blessed. Are you representing God in these areas?
Welcome to this episode of The French Press. Let me pour you a cup of coffee while we talk about intrigues of faith, pages we've dog-eared, and the life in between on The French Press.
Welcome to another episode of The French Press, where we talk about books I've read, intrigues of faith, and the life in between. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be having some cups of conversation. Maybe you have a cup of coffee or hot tea nearby. It is summer. Maybe you are an iced coffee drinker. I am not. I always like to have a hot black cup of coffee. But whatever you're drinking, there is room for you at the table. Just like wherever you're at in life, there is room for you in this podcast. Are you kind of curious about faith and you'd like to hear about it? This is a great place. If you want to grow in your faith, if you just enjoy reading, but you like to look at it with kind of a biblical lens or, kind of a faith bend on reading, then you'll really enjoy this podcast also. My hope is really just to give you some insights into the books I'm reading. I absolutely love reading. I made a whole podcast about it. And I love talking about what I'm reading. One of my favorite things to do is to meet a friend for coffee and just be like, well, let me tell you about all these books I'm reading. So if you're into that, which it seems a lot of you are, you're in the right spot. We have been talking about a book, or I introduced a new book last time called Insterments in the Redemers' Hands by Paul David Tripp. And this book was one that I would say, although it's not the book you guys have bought the most, but it's only been on for one episode, it is the book you guys bought the quickest. So it seems like even though I only talked about it one time, several of you contacted me and said, I'm getting this book. So it must have really resonated very quickly. I thought that was interesting. It kind of did the same thing for me. I picked it up and started reading it and thought, oh, wow, this book's going to be really good. And I'm a little bit intimidated by it because it's very challenging in just the way we live our lives. To give you a brief overview of it thus far, I'm not super, I think I'm like six, 7 chapters in, but the idea is your personal ministry. We're all called to this. Kind of what are you doing about it is what he's asking. Like we're all called to be a representation of Christ in others' lives, if you're a Christian, that is. And that is mostly going to probably work out in relationships, personal relationships, work relationships, community relationships, family, these people that are in your field. In a pretty early on episode, I did a book on Ruth, and we talked about a lot how we have people in our own field. Like we are to minister to the people in our lives. Sure, we can go out and seek people out to minister to if the Holy Spirit's calling you to do that. Absolutely. If you feel like I'm going to go out there and find people to talk to. But a lot of us aren't called to that. It's more that we're called to minister to the people that have been placed in our lives organically. If you have a job, you have coworkers. If you have kids, they have friends and parents, and you do school functions. Maybe you do a lot of volunteer work and you're involved in your community. Maybe you're in a book club. Maybe you do different little clubs or activities. These are the people that are in your lives. And if you're a Christian, God has actually probably planted you in their lives for a reason. And this book really deals with that. And he starts with dealing with our own selves so we can be somebody that can have a personal ministry. He says how we are ambassadors of Christ. We represent Christ. And an ambassador kind of gives up their old life, right? Their old ways, and they now represent the king or a country. So we represent Jesus. We represent God's kingdom. And so when we are making choices in our conduct, in our speech, even what we do with our time, even our thought life, we've really given up the right to say, well, this is what I want to do. It's about me. And, this is what I enjoy or I like. And we've really instead looked to the Lord and like, what do you want us to do? And he gives us a lot of gifts and talents and interests. And I dare say they're not just for us. Like you might say, hey, I love to read. That's great. Join a book club or have a friend you go through books with. But it's probably not just for your own enjoyment. There's more to it. Like God wants you to use it, whatever that is. Maybe it's you're really good with math, or you're really crafty and handy, and you're into carpentry, or you love to garden. Like we have these things that I believe God planted in our hearts, and we love these things. And I believe he takes pleasure in us loving these things. But they're not just meant for our enjoyment. We have a time of respite, and we certainly can say, you know what, I'm just going to get in my garden, or I'm just going to get in a book, and that is absolutely great. But it can't be that all the time. We are called into the field. We are called to work. And I think a lot of the things that we're naturally called into, God would have us use to represent him and to bring him glory. And that's really what this book talks about. And today we're going to talk about a trickier part of it, which is sort of having our hearts ready for that. Are our hearts ready to serve God in this way? So this chapter is a little bit more challenging, I found. I'm going to read this part where he kind of addresses this. He says, the bottom line is this. The problem is not that God is not here or that he is inactive. The problem is that we don't see him. Our perspective on life is often tragically godless. We miss the one thing worth seeing, the glory of the ever-present God. When this happens, our lives are not built on the foundation of God's glory, which was intended to give our lives a starting point and a destination, a reason to get up and the strength to go on. Every human life pursues some kind of glory. If it's not the glory of God, it will be some kind of earth-bound pseudo-glory. So right away, he's addressing what's the problem. He's saying we can't see God, and so we sometimes forget about him. But he actually uses us, his hands and feet, the body of Christ, to represent him. So that is like a main thing we're doing on earth as Christians, is we are representing God to other believers, to our family, to non-believers, in the way we think, in the way we talk. We are representing God, and in all the spheres, right? All the fields that we naturally go into, be it work, be it school, be it what we do for fun, what we do for hobbies. Are we bringing glory to God in these things? What are we doing with this interest, this talent? What are we doing with this money we make? What are we doing with these relationships that have been put into our lives? And why are we pursuing certain things? What is the purpose ultimately? And to adjust it, that the purpose isn't just for ourselves. It isn't just for our own pleasure or our own comfort because we want this thing. But what if the purpose is to serve God in these different fields? And he talks about the problem. Like, why is this a problem for us? Why don't we just naturally do this? Why did he have to write a book about this? Why do we have to talk about this? Why do we have to kind of challenge ourselves to not be selfish and to not be all about us? He says, basically, sin makes us fools. It reduces us to fools. We tend to love lies, to be self-deluded, to be the strongest believer of our own empty arguments. We are susceptible to the enemy's tricks and temptations. We live for what is already in a state of decay and ignore what will remain forever. We tend to hide, ignore, or be blind to our own sin, while we are obsessively focused on the sin of others. I think we can all relate to that. I think we all fall into these categories. And part of what God is doing in the Christian's life is sanctification, which is working on bringing some of these sinful things to the surface. And we often hear in the Bible, and we hear these messages of often our trials and our tribulations, they kind of jostle us and they bring forward what is the problem in our lives. Like sometimes we walk through trials and we're like, wow, I do not like the way I acted in that trial. I was really selfish. I was really angry. I lashed out. I went into a deep depression. I stopped caring about people. I was kind of all about myself in it. And so many of us, maybe most of us, behave this way in trials. I know I do. And what if God is allowing those in our lives and he's walking us through those to kind of bring the things that are in our hearts, the sins and the problems that are in our hearts, to bring them up to the surface and show us this is something we need to work on. And God, being the gracious, loving God he is like, let me work on this with you. Let me first of all show you, here's what we're dealing with. And then let's move this out. Let's have some healing here. Let's heal this wound. And often, things happen to us and we're victims of things, or, maybe something happened in our childhood. Maybe something's happening right now that is out of our control and we would never choose this, but it's going on in our lives. But yet it's bringing forward something in our heart that isn't trusting God or isn't behaving in the correct way with it. And obviously we will have our emotions, and I'm by no way saying we should be robots and just act like, oh, it's so great, I'm having such a great time in this trial. I'm more saying it's a chance to examine, why am I responding in this way instead of that way? And again, not like a robot and not like, oh, I don't care about this at all. We obviously care about trials. Trials are hard. There are a lot of examples in the Bible of people being upset and struggling in their trials. King David, if you read the Psalms, you see how much he struggled in his trials. The way he talks, it's very poetic. It's very relatable. So he certainly was not a robot when he was being chased by Saul, or he was having all the trouble with his children, and he had made mistakes and things had happened and he was reaping those things. He was not a robot in those. He felt them, he cried over them, he went to the Lord in them. And so certainly we are to do that, but also to examine why is this maybe repeating in my life so often, or why do I always go here with this instead of to trust, and why am I isolating instead of reaching out to godly friends? Why am I angry instead of going to God and trusting him with what's happening? Or why am I depressed instead of looking for hope? Very easy to say, very hard to do, but he's certainly calling us out on this in this book. Now, last episode, I talked about a parenting book called Child Training Tips. Very boring title. It was by Reb Bradley, I believe. And he talked about, in parenting, the point of parenting is to get our children to maturity. And the point of maturity is to get to the point where we can obey God. Because what God asks us to do is the opposite of what we would do. He asks us to put ourselves last. He asks us to put others first. He calls us to not only love the people that irritate us and annoy us, like maybe our family or our coworkers, he actually calls us to love our enemies. And it's such a radical idea that he knows we can't get there without maturity. And the more maturity we have in faith, the more we're able to die to self. And the more we're able to say, wow, that person really hurt me. They really wronged me. I'm actually going to pray for them. What a wild idea. And I don't know if you've ever done it. I can't say I always do it, but I have at times been able to do that. Something's happened and I want to be mad, or I want to be sad or hurt. And I've instead been like, you know what? I'm just going to pray for this person. I'm going to go right to prayer. And it really is a different tactic. And I can't say I can always do it, but the times I've been able to, I've found it very freeing. It's like I'm freed from all these emotions I want to have or I want to fall into. And instead, I've really just given it over to the Lord. I've obeyed what he wanted me to do. And there is a lot of freedom there. And that is what God is always offering us. We talked about in the last episode that self-control gives us the freedom from having to do what we feel like doing. And a lot of times what we feel like doing is not what's best, right? What we feel like doing is being selfish or being angry or being bitter, being envious. These things that God warns us about, don't let these things in your heart. Don't think on these things because they will create problems. And instead, he offers us the fruit of the Spirit, which is the opposite of all those things. And he offers us, love and joy and peace and patience and these things that will actually grow good fruit in our lives and then allow us to be obedient to him. So this book has really challenged me in this way. And I've been thinking about it a lot since I've been reading it, that the goal is for the world to see and know Christ. That's the goal. And as his followers, that's our job. That's what we're signing up for. We're signing up to say, I was lost and now I'm found. I was dead and now I'm alive. And now I see that the temporal things, the earthly things, they're not going to stick around. And I can't put all my time in these things. I have to look to the eternal things. I have to look to the gold and the silver in heaven. And I have to put my value there. And when I put my value there, things start to really change in my life. Sure, we still have to have homes, and we still have to eat, and we still have to take care of ourselves, and we still have to work, and we still have to earn money. We have to do all these things, but they're not the goal so much. We're not building a mansion on this earth. Our goal is not to do all the things we want to do. Our goal is, what do you want, God? And I like to be like, here's the things I love, God. I love these things. Can you use them? Is there a way you can use them as ministry? Have you ever prayed that way? Have you thought, here's what I'm good at. Here's my talents. Here's my interests. How can I use them for the Lord? How can they have eternal value instead of temporal value? And it's a complete upside down from what the flesh wants to do, right? It's a spiritual thing and not a fleshly thing. He talks about how different the disciples were. And I don't know if this has really struck me as much as it should. You know, he talks about how, like, there's Matthew, the tax collector, and on the other hand, you've got Simon the Zealot. These two people should hate each other. These two people do not get along. Yet Christ is showing us the people he called were so different. It does not make sense that they would overlap in life. And yet they do. When we join the body of Christ, when we join a church, the invisible church, you know, the physical church we join, we are joined in a brotherhood, a sisterhood with people that we maybe wouldn't normally interact with, people that live very different lives than us. If you look at the early church, you see the church was often made up of, you know, the very, very wealthy and the very, very poor. Sometimes people that were servants and slaves were literally going to church with people that, you know, were wealthy and, you know, had freedom. And yet they were going to church together. This is wild. This is wild, like a tax collector and a zealot doing ministry together. And he says here that Christ's purpose for Matthew and Simon was that the relationship display such an amazing unity in love that the surrounding world would take notice, and in so doing would see Christ. So I ask you this, do you have a relationship that only makes sense because of Christ? Do you have anyone in your life that you're like, I really probably wouldn't be friends with this person except because of Christ? And what a beauty there is there. What glory to God. What interests to the world. You know, why are these two friends? They don't really overlap. They're opposite. Maybe it's like a boss and an employee, or it's a, you know, a family member that you're like, yeah, I wouldn't really hang out with you, but I love you. And so we have this relationship. Or, you know, maybe it's a coworker that really is like, gosh, this person really kind of annoys me, but I'm a Christian and I love them, and I'm going to ask them to lunch, or I'm going to listen to this story again, or I'm going to try to look past their irritants and show them God's glory. And how often do people do this to us? We're the person that someone's like, ooh, you're not my cup of tea. But, you know, we are in God's family together. And so I'm going to make time for you, and I'm going to minister to you. And that is part of that sanctification. He says that we are therefore Christ's ambassador, as though God were making this appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. The job of an ambassador is to represent someone or something. Everything he does and says must represent a leader who is not physically present. His relationship is not primarily driven by his own happiness. He decides to go places and do things because they will help him to faithfully represent the King. Our lives do not belong to us for our own fulfillment. The primary issue is, how can I represent the King in this place with this particular person? This is not a part-time calling, it is a lifestyle. So then he goes on to kind of bring in these certain areas of our lives. I thought this paragraph was good. What is God calling you to in your marriage? To be an ambassador. What is God calling you to as a parent? to be an ambassador? What is God calling you regarding your friends and your neighbors to be an ambassador? What is God calling you to at work and in leisure to be an ambassador? We represent God's purpose to the people that He places in our lives. This is much broader than a commitment to formal ministry, occupying a portion of our schedule. It acknowledges that our lives belong to the King. So think about the things you do. Think about your hobbies and your sports and your relationships. Think about the ways you suffer and think about the ways you are blessed. Are you representing God in these areas? Is there something that's maybe overtaken your life a little bit and it takes a lot of time? Maybe it's just all about you. Again, there are times for breaks. There are times to do fun things. I'm not saying there's not, but more if it's overtaking your ministry time. Are you spending the time with God? Are you in the Word? Are you spending time in prayer? Do you have a group of people that you meet with, that you're accountable to and they're accountable to you? Do you have people you're willing to be vulnerable with and say, hey, these are the things in my heart I struggle with. I'm easily annoyed. I have no patience. I don't like this person that's in my life. Can you help me pray for them? Or I just want to do this stuff all the time. It's really fun. And I don't want to do these other things. They're not fun. Just asking people in your lives to just pray for you and help you be hungry for the things God wants you to be hungry for. Ask Him to place something in your heart. What do you want me to do, God? And it may just be not even really changing your lifestyle. It may very well just be changing your attitude. Sometimes we're in great, really fruitful, rich ministry opportunities with our own children, with our own church, with our own community, at our place of work. These places are very ripe with opportunities to do ministry, and we're just not choosing to take them. That could be it. Or you could have kind of fallen into an isolating lifestyle. It's easy to just go to work and come home, and I don't want to do other things. I don't want to get involved in a Bible study. I don't want to have a prayer group. I don't want to ask that neighbor to coffee to kind of see where they're at with the Lord. Like, I'm tired. Sometimes it's more of that issue. So just bringing it before the Lord and asking Him what He wants you to do, not out of like, I better check this box and say I've done ministry, more of an outpouring of gratitude in our hearts because what God has done for us, and more of like an eye change. We see the world differently. We see how not only do the lost need us, but other Christians need us. They need our encouragement. They need our hope. They need our teaching, and we need theirs. We need people to speak into our lives and say, hey, are you in the Word? Hey, can I pray for you? Hey, I see this thing in your life. It looks a little weird. Can we talk about it? Are we able to have these exchanges, or are we too easily offended? Which brings me to a new book. This one's a little wild. The title alone is wild, so get ready. This is a book that has been sort of on my radar. It keeps getting recommended to me. Several times it's been recommended to me. And I feel like when I buy books online, this is the book they recommend. Do you also want this book? And I'm like, nope, I don't think so. So anyways, I keep seeing this book everywhere. And then I went over to a friend's house the other day, and I was looking at her bookshelf because, some people, they want to look at what food you have, or they want to look how you decorated. I want to look at your bookshelf. What are you reading? Can we talk about these books? So anyways, I'm looking at her little bookshelf, and there's this book sitting on the bookshelf, not only one copy, but 2 copies. And so I said something to her. I said, it's funny you have this book because I actually keep getting it recommended to me. And she said, oh yeah, that's funny. It keeps getting recommended to me. And I was at the thrift store the other day and there were 2 copies of it. So I went ahead and bought it. And so we decided to read this book together. The title is called The Bait of Satan, terrifying, by John Bevere, Bevere. I don't know if I'm saying that right. The subtitle is Living Free from the Deadly Trap of Offense. Offense? Offense. Offense. I don't know. You decide. And then this book is like red with black writing. It's actually really terrifying looking. I feel like if you saw it on my bookshelf, you might be like, oh, what are you into? But it's kind of the opposite of what it's saying. It's saying like, have you fed into this trap that Satan has set for you, which is to be offended? And so I started reading it, and so far it's really good. I have to say, I've marked it up a ton. I'm not very far into it, but I felt like it went really well with this Redeemer's Handbook, where he is kind of just talking about, are we lovers of ourselves or do we love other people? Are we so offended that we painted ourselves into a corner and we're like, yep, I can't go to church. I got hurt at church. I can't be in relationships. I got hurt with relationships. My family hurt me. My friends hurt me. And we just kind of keep getting hurt by all these people. Not to say we don't really get hurt. We 100% do. And that's sort of the point he's making. He says right in the beginning, he's taking this out of Luke 17:1, and it says, is it possible that no offenses should come? I think Jesus is saying this. Is it even possible that you won't be offended? And obviously he's saying, well, no, you will be offended. 100% you'll be offended. You'll probably be offended multiple times a day by the people that are supposed to love you the most, by other Christians, by non-Christians, by what you read on the internet, by someone in traffic, right? I mean, we're just offended all day long. And I think we tend to kind of collect these offenses and keep them in our pocket and pull them out and say, well, that's why I don't do this, because I got hurt. And I know I do this, yeah, I'm not going to be in that group anymore. I got hurt in that group. Or I'm not going to go to that. I got hurt in that way. And I can think of several examples in my own life. I'm sure you can. I'll give you one. It's kind of embarrassing. But I remember I volunteered to work at something, like a fundraiser. And it was kind of a big commitment. And it was kind of this all day in the sense that it was an all day event. So I cleared my schedule to help with this fundraiser. And, I show up and I'm I'm all right, I'm here to help with this thing. I didn't really want to do it. I did it anyways. And I showed up and they were sort of like, oh, we don't really need more help. Well, let's have you do this thing. And they really didn't know what to do with me. I was this extra person that they really didn't need. And I was very offended. And I chose to be offended by this and felt like, do you know how busy I am? I could have done 100 other things. You didn't even need me. I'm just standing around. And so the next year when the fundraiser came up again, I kind of had this attitude of yeah, I'm not going to volunteer for that because last year I just stood around and you didn't even need me. And I took an offense in it. And I did end up helping with the fundraiser again, I will say. And I can see where my heart was wrong in it. It was all about me and my time. And yes, I'm willing to help, but you better use me. If I show up and you don't use me, I'm mad. And yet, how would I run a fundraiser? Not well. I would also take any help I got and then have people standing around. And am I willing to have the grace with people who are all volunteers and not doing this for their own fun? Am I willing to have grace with them, hoping they would have grace with me if I were in a situation? And I really had to recheck my heart with how I felt about that. That's just one example of many. I feel like I do it a lot when I'm driving. You get behind someone slow and you're offended and annoyed. And then yet, if it's winter, you're probably driving behind me and I'm really slow and I want you to have grace with me. So it's just that when you start to look at offenses, did the people even really mean it? Are you just looking for a place to be offended? And sometimes, yep, they meant it. And are you willing to work through that and to say, maybe we have to have a conversation about it, but I love you and I want to work through this. So I felt like this book really was making me think a lot about what is the cure to not being offended. That's kind of what he's offering in this book. And I'm here for it. I want the cure. I don't want to be so easily offended. I don't want to be easily hurt. I want the freedom from these things, which is how he describes it. And he kind of talks about the condition of our heart, which goes along with the Redeemer book. And he talks about how gold is soft and it is flexible and pliable, and that Jesus said in Revelation 3:18, Jesus' first instruction for breaking free from deception was to buy from me gold refined in the fire. So Jesus is saying, buy refined gold. And we can quickly see the parallel here. A pure heart is like pure gold, soft, tender, and pliable. Hebrews 3:13 states that hearts are hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. If we do not deal with an offense, it will produce more fruit of sin, such as bitterness, anger, and resentment. And I would say you could go beyond even just an offense, right? If you don't deal with hurts and bitterness and whatever it is, they may not all be born out of an offense. A lot of them can be. But anyways, he's saying we get this bitterness, anger, and resentment, and this added substance hardens our heart just as alloy hardens gold. This reduces or removes tenderness, creates a loss of sensitivity. We are hindered in our ability to hear God's voice. Our accuracy to see is darkened. This is a perfect setting for deception. In Isaiah 48:10, it says, "Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction." Don't love those words. Really don't want to be tested in the furnace of affliction. But he's saying, if you're offended, if you're hurt, if you in these struggles, in these trials that will come, you will have them, how will you respond in them? Will you go deeper into the hurt, into the offense, or will you rise to the occasion? Will you let the dross, if you will, rise to the surface of your heart and be dealt with? Will you say, wow, God, I got really hurt by what they said. Why did that hurt me so much? I don't have the full answer. I'm hoping this book gives me a lot of thoughts. I'm literally in chapter 1. So I'm hoping he really goes into how are we not so easily offended? How are we not so easily hurt? How do we get freedom from these things? He says, God refines with afflictions, trials, and tribulations. The heat which separates impurities such as unforgiveness, strife, bitterness, anger, and envy, and so forth, from the character of God in our lives. Sin easily hides where there is no heat of trials and afflictions. In times of prosperity and success, even a wicked man will seem good and generous. Under the heat of trials, however, the impurities surface. Ooh, I think this is really interesting. My example of helping with the, little fundraiser, it's a pretty benign thing, but what surfaced in me? Oh, I was annoyed that it felt like they didn't need me there and I could have done other things. And that annoyance came in my heart instead of just being like, okay, well, I said I would do this. I'm here. There's not really anything for me to do. Maybe I can talk to somebody or pray for somebody, or I could walk around this building and pray. I don't know. I could have certainly had a different attitude than I did. And that's kind of it's not a real high stakes game there, but if it's something like in your marriage or in your family or just in your church, these are high stakes where we're like, I might walk away from my family. I might walk away from my church. I might choose to react in this other way that's going to cause really serious damage. Are we willing to let God use these trials to refine us? I think I talked about this maybe the last episode. I can't remember, where I talked about Hans Brinker and the boys were staying in an inn and they get robbed, and some of them are courageous during the robbery and some of them are fearful and they hide, and it kind of showed what was really in their hearts, because prior to the robbery they were all like, oh, we're so brave and tough and we can take anyone and we're not scared of anything. And then when something actually happened, several of them were really afraid. And so they had that fear, even though they didn't think they did. It actually, that robbery brought that fear up in them. And it's something to deal with, to look at, what do I do in these situations? And kind of moving into Hans Brinker, I've actually finished it. I'm sad to see it go. I really did enjoy it. There are a couple points at the end I want to bring up. And I know several of you are reading this book. I'm really excited for you to read it. Thank you for being interested in it. I hope you find all the little nuances in it that I did. But anyways, we're on to the great race, which is for the silver skates, which is in the title of the book. And Hans is really favored to be one of the winners, and so is Peter. So Peter is a boy that has sort of befriended Hans. He helped him find a doctor for his father. He kind of like took an interest in Hans, and Hans noticed this. And the two boys are probably the top people favored to win this race. And, you know, they're doing laps or whatever. And at one point, Hans looks over and sees Peter like messing around with his skate, and he immediately goes over to him and is like, "What's wrong? You know, why aren't you in the race?" And Peter says, "Oh, my strap broke on my skate. I won't be able to. You'll probably win it. Go ahead." And Hans, without even a moment's hesitation, just leans down, takes off his own strap, and hands it to Peter and says, "No, I want you to have it." And Peter says, "No, no, you go. You'll win the race." And Hans is like, "No, my friendship with you is more important than winning this race." And I think, what an interesting picture. Are our relationships more important than maybe it's an offense? Maybe it's an inconvenience. Maybe it's oh gosh, I feel like, you know, they have this thing and I don't, or they can do these things and I can't, so I'm going to pull away. Or, you know, there's so many things that cause disruptions in relationships. And easily Hans could have just, you know, kept his strap, gone on to maybe win the race. And yet he valued this relationship with Peter and put Peter ahead of him and said, "No, I want you to take this." And I thought that was such a beautiful act, like a young boy being willing to put down his competitiveness, because he was competitive and he does care and he is good. It's not like he's just like, "Oh, who cares?" Like, he cares. And so are we willing to lay down something we care about? Like, gosh, I really wanted to go do this other thing, but my friend needs my help. I'm going to give that up. I really would have done something else with my day, but I volunteered to do this, and I'm just going to be there, and I'm going to be there with a good attitude. You know, whatever it is that we are tempted to put ourselves first, and in what ways can we put others first? And I'll leave some twists at the end of this book so you have them, but I do want to talk about this one little part at the end where Hans decides he wants to try to become a doctor, and it's going to be hard work, and he's got a lot of studying to do. And it's kind of talking about him going forward in this. And it says, "To the Brinker family, it has brought great changes. Hans has spent the years faithfully and profitably conquering obstacles as they arose and pursuing one object with all the energy of his nature." I think that's an interesting sentence for us. Are we doing these things? Are we faithfully and profitably conquering the obstacles as they arise? You know, are we willing to work on our hearts? Are we willing to let the trials and the afflictions bring up the dross? And are we willing to give it to God and say, "I don't want this anymore. I don't want to envy. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be annoyed. I want to have more patience and love and peace, because these trials will keep coming. They will never stop. And I want to handle them better." And I think Hans handled these things moving towards what he wanted. And is what we want to be more usable by God? Is what we want to be an instrument in his hands? It's a good question. He had said to the doctor that he talks about how noble a profession being a surgeon was. And the doctor kind of said, "Actually, surgery is an ugly business." And Hans will go on to agree with that. And often what we choose to go into when we choose to let God do surgery on our heart, it is often an ugly business. The things that come out, it's bloody, it's gross, it's yucky when you have surgery, right? But it is moving towards a life-saving event. And are we willing to let God do surgery on our hearts? Are we willing to let these trials and afflictions come in and work this stuff out of us? And Hans says that he goes on to agree that surgery is an ugly business, but he also said it is great and noble, and it awakens a reverence for God's work. Our calling is to be an ambassador for God, as we learned in the Redemers Hans book. We're called to be ambassadors, whatever that looks like. Is it parenting? Is it marriage? Is it singleness? Is it full-time ministry? Is it a lay job? Is it through art? Is it through music? Whatever we're called into, we're actually being an ambassador in that thing. And we come in with all this junk, right? And are we willing to let God work on our hearts and then by letting other people see that, it will give a reverence for God's work. Look at where they were. Look at who they were. And yet they let God work on them. And they've let the trials and the tribulations sandpaper off some of that stuff that made them abrasive or harsh or hard to work with. And I can even reflect on my own self, in increments of time, of how I used to be more offended. Not to say I'm still not, but I can see a change in that. Or I used to be more apt to get in an argument with someone, or I had to defend what I thought, and that was so important. And even spiritually, I was like, well, this is what I think, and this is right, and everyone should think it. And I think we often think that way when we're young. And as we age, we kind of mellow out a little and think, oh yeah, there's lots of interpretations here, and people have fought over these interpretations for thousands of years. And I can say my view, and they can say your view, and can we still be friends and not be offended? And I think that's a mark of maturity and that softening of the heart. Are we getting softer, or are we getting harder? Is our heart getting hardened and darker, or is our heart getting softer and lighter and more able to be used by God? And in the end, it talks about Gretel a little bit, and it really hails her as she became someone who was so softened and was so delightful and so sweet, and people just loved her. And I really think it was because she had so many trials when she was young. She didn't get to go and have the pretty dresses and do all the fun things all the other girls got to do, and she really struggled, and she had to work at home, and she had a lot of trials, but it made her tender. And I just think the way these two kids end up in the end is very beautiful to where they started. So I hope you enjoy Hans Brinker as much as I did. I'd love to hear about it if you're reading it. I think I'm going to save another book for next time. I have a couple new ones and one I want to finish up, but I think I'm going to save that. And I know I say these things and I don't come back to them, but I'm going to do my best to. And I plan to continue in The Bait of Satan, and I will be continuing in Instrument in the Redeemer's Hands. So says I now. We'll find out what I actually read and do and talk about. But if you're interested in any of these books, let me know. I'd love to hear who's reading what. That makes me really excited. And if you're like, I will never buy these books and I will never read them, I am so glad you listened to this podcast. It's so fun to me that you still want to hear about them anyways. So thank you. I love your support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for giving me feedback. I really would love your prayers about the podcast, especially when it comes to technical issues. I've had so many, and it really could drive me to tears. So if you could pray about technical issues, and I just pray that maybe the Lord brings someone into my life that can help figure out some of the tech stuff, because it is definitely not my thing. But I'm going to keep going through it and try not to be too irritated and mad at it, and try to work through it. It's been a struggle. So anyways, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on The French Press. I'm so glad you joined me today on The French Press. If you liked what you heard, you should follow me. That way you'll get all the latest episodes. And if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to rate the show. Also, if you'd like to follow my blog, The Demi-Tasse Drafts, I have a link below in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Anytime you can leave a like, comment, reshare a post. All these help my ministry get more traction. The most important thing you can do is pray. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for sharing a French press with me today.